You are here for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative's Thought Leadership Series. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm the Reentry Services Program Director at Goodwill Industries International. Today, I'm representing the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative as a member of the Coordination Committee and as the Thought Leadership Series lead. Today's conversation is going to focus on solutions to collateral consequences. And I'm really excited to go ahead and get us started. And with that, we will go ahead and introduce Jason White. Jason is our chairman of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. He also is a employee at the Latino Coalition as well. Jason has put so much time and effort into coordinating, collaborating, convening. If we could just give him a virtual round of applause as he joins us and shares some updates with us. He has truly committed so much time to this cause and really made big bets on us as a community. So just Jason, welcome. Thank you so much and can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So grateful for partnering with you and especially excited about this session and this time that we get to spend together. So welcome everyone to the seventh session of our Thought Leadership session. We're super excited that you're able to join us and spend this time with us. If this is your first time you're joining us, the Thought Leadership session, or series, I should say, is really our way of facilitating continuous learning in the field, where every quarter we seek to get together on one national platform to really highlight some of the strategies, approaches, and the different things that are really making an impact in the field. And before we go into our session, I do want to take a quick moment just to say thank you so much for those of you on the call that were able to make it to our inaugural conference in October. Folks were able to get together in Bethesda in person. We had almost 200 persons that showed up from all different aspects of the reentry workforce ecosystem. Folks, this was the first time in the history of our work that the entire reentry workforce field came together in one place at a national level. So we were super excited to be able to host and facilitate that process. And that being said, we got so much feedback that was so encouraging. And in short, I would say the conference literally exceeded our expectation. In the feedback that we got from persons who actually responded to the survey, 100% of the folks who responded said that they believe that the content was really applicable and helpful for their work. And over 90% of the individuals indicated that they actually made some connection that could actually lead to meaningful partnerships. So we were very, very encouraged to facilitate that. But what I would say that has been my biggest takeaway from the conference, our biggest encouragement. I remember I was talking with a new colleague who I met at the conference actually, and he was sharing how he felt like before the conference, he actually was thinking about giving up on the work. And what he shared with me was that coming to the conference and getting connected with so many persons across the country who are like-minded and committed to work gave him the energy to continue and the hope that he needs to go back and get the job done, so to say. And folks, that is part of the reason why we get together each quarter as well, to really elevate some practice for us to learn together, but also to really communicate to the field that, there's a lot of us that are doing this work across the country, and we want to be a catalyst, so to say, to really move the work forward. So again, thank you so much for investing and coming out to spend time with us in Bethesda. That being said, we're going to transition to our session for today. And our topic is solutions to collateral consequences, as Jennifer mentioned. And even as we get ready for the session, the first thought that I would like us to consider is why is this important? And I think Michael Pinar, who is a law professor at the University of Maryland, has a quote here that I'd like to share that I think captures the why, in terms of why it's important for us to really look seriously at collateral consequences. He says, and I quote, "The United States has a unique, extensive, and debilitating web of collateral consequences that continue to punish and stigmatize individuals with criminal records long after the completion of their sentences. And folks, we understand this at NRWC. And as a result of that, we believe that we need to have a concerted effort to really find solution and address these collateral consequences. And this particular webinar is one of our steps in that direction. And our panelists will also talk about some of the things that we're going to be doing outside of this. But that being said, I really don't want to take up too much more time. It's really my pleasure to hand over back to Jennifer Lynch, who is, as she said, she's our thought leadership lead. She has been with us from the beginning and been serving faithfully. And she's also the director the Reentry Services Director at Goodwill Industries. Jennifer, it is my pleasure to hand over to you. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you, Jason. And one last time, thank you for all that you do for us as a community. Also, want to share thanks for our speakers today who have quite graciously dedicated their time. We've put a lot of time and prep into this conversation, as I mentioned earlier. And so, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to all of them and also give you a brief introduction to them. So, with us today will be Ashley First, who is a senior program manager at the Responsible Business Initiatives for Justice. We'll also be joined by Lakeithia Furby, representing Strive. She's the executive vice president of programs and impact. Then we will hear from Jay Adams. Jay is the Reentry Initiative Program Manager at PowerCorps, based out of Philadelphia. And then based in New York City, we'll be joined by a representative from Arnold Ventures. She's the Director of Criminal Justice, and that would be Carson White Lemon. And so with that, we are going to go ahead and just go into our conversation and get started today. Collateral consequences is something that deeply impacts those that we serve. So we're going to go ahead and get started with a question that I'm going to pose to all of the presenters. And they're going to give us a short little informational session on how they're impacted by collateral consequences, how their work's impacted by collateral consequences, and how our larger community is impacted by collateral consequences as well. So first to our virtual stage, I'd like to welcome Lakeithia Furby from Strive as she gives us a brief introduction into collateral consequences and how we're looking forward to solutions in the future. Welcome, Lakeithia.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I'm Lakeithia Furby, as Jennifer mentioned. I've been in the workforce development field for 17 years. Through that time, I've been working to help people not only get jobs, but keep jobs and then advance. And what I was struck by is the breadth and depth of collateral consequences across the country. This slide just is an overview, shows that there's over 40,000 collateral consequences that affect people's ability to get a job, to keep a job, and to actually move into obtain economic mobility. Personally, as I've also been, my family members have been affected by collateral consequences. I have a brother who was incarcerated, and when he came home from prison, he was not able to have a driver's license, which impacted his ability to get a job. Then, once he got a job, he was hired with a temp agency, and then later lost the job once the company did a background check. So, collateral consequences have very personal and professional significance for me as a practitioner. I think about the importance of it because most everyone I know got into this business because they want to help people. But the reality is that if we're not really paying attention and knowledgeable about collateral consequences, we absolutely can hurt people because collateral consequences limit someone's ability to obtain employment. Often, either the employer's ability to hire someone directly, ability to get occupational licenses, or to start a business. So, for example, if you're doing a training program that trains someone in HVAC, for example, and you haven't made sure that that people who have a break-in and entering charge are still able to get a job in that field, you could be training people who aren't able to get actual employment in the field. Everyone is aware of the example in California where people were fighting fires and initially weren't able to get a job once they got home. And so for me, practitioners understanding collateral consequences is really critical to make sure that we aren't reducing hope and hurting people by setting them up for false expectations that they'll be able to get a job that they can't actually obtain. And I set about making sure that we're informed and that we partner with other agencies who can help us mitigate collateral consequences that affect our participants. Thank you.
And thank you to Lakeithia as well. We're going to head next to hear from Ashley first, who's a senior program manager at the Responsible Business Initiatives for Justice. Welcome, Ashley. Thank you for taking time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with everyone. So, like Jennifer mentioned, I'm the Senior Program Manager for Employment Opportunities at RBIJ. And for those that are not familiar with RBIJ, we are an international nonprofit that works with companies to champion fairness, equality, and effectiveness across systems of punishment and incarceration. In a nutshell, we believe that when businesses speak, legislators will listen. And we believe that partnerships are one of the most effective ways to enact change in systems of punishment. So, with regards to collateral consequences, access to employment, things like that, we believe that more fair and equitable access to employment and dismantling that punitive barrier for access to employment is a really critical need right now. So, for example, we work a lot in clean slate legislation, which is the automatic sealing of records. We're exploring how occupational licensing not only affects individuals who are justice involved, but also how does that affect businesses and their ability to fill open roles that justice involved people could fill, but they cannot get a license. So, that's from the business from RBIJ's perspective, but I also have a personal perspective. I did time in the federal prison system. I'm actually on federal supervised release right now. So I would see women going through programs like cosmetology and training where they would have to get an occupational licensing when they come out, knowing that they can't get a license in that field. So it was frustrating to me to see these programs being implemented in prisons that people cannot get work in when they come out. And I know personally, I was very lucky growing up. I had access to education. I have my master's degree in marketing from Johns Hopkins, but that didn't matter when I came home. So I actually started working at Goodwill of Colorado, sorting through donated clothes, and then kind of worked my way back up to get to where I am now. But I've had job offers rescinded for basic entry level positions that I was more than qualified for after a background check came back, or they found out I was in a halfway house or had, terms that I couldn't be at work for a certain amount of time. So I'm grateful to Goodwill of Colorado for giving me that opportunity to even get back into employment to begin with. So that's just a little bit about me. And I know we're going to go into some more of the personal barriers in a little bit, but yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here, Jennifer.
Thank you for the brief introduction, Ashley. We're really grateful to learn alongside you today. With that, I'd like to welcome Jay Adams to the conversation. Jay is representing PowerCore based out of Philadelphia. And Jay, you are welcome to go ahead and go off mute and come on camera if you feel comfortable.
Hello everybody. For some reason my camera is not coming on. Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jay Adams. I am the Reentry Initiative Program Manager for PowerCore's Trust Initiative here in Philadelphia. And what PowerCore is, what we do is we redirect, and it's a paid workforce development initiative for youth 18 to 30. And we engage them in urban agriculture and environmental stewardship as a way of performing and giving back to the community. And it works very well because one thing that I notice about our youth is they are desperately looking for something else to do. All the normal things are not really panning out. So our program really immerses them in a whole different type of climate and culture of community, of friendship, of family, and all of those good, foundational emotions and actions. I also did 5 years in the feds, and unfortunately, I'm off supervised release. So I do have lived experience in with negative lived experience with the criminal justice system, and this is one of the reasons why I have chose this profession. I feel blessed that that I was able to turn a negative into a positive and make my criminal background a positive for me and put me on a career lattice opportunity. When I first came home, I was homeless just 5, 6 years ago, and now I'm running a reentry program, and it goes to show you that the talent behind the walls is great, and we do need these measures that are being put in place to help folks that are coming home uh, be able to design and implement their own futures. Um, it's it takes a collaborative. I am also part of the Philadelphia Reentry Coalition, and that's a collaborative that connects all the reentry stakeholders in Philadelphia under one roof so that we can share resources and be able to service our communities even better. We're looking to open up resource hubs within different areas of the city because one of the things that our youth suffer from is lack of resources or not knowing how to find them or have them ready accessible. So we're looking to put resource hubs throughout the city to sort of a one-stop hub where multiple organizations are under one roof, and because not one organization can handle everything. We all have our little specialties, and that's why it's good to have collaboration such as this to bring us all together, and we can put all our heads together and come up with solutions. One of the other major things that's going on in Philadelphia is one of our judges in the CJC, our Justice Center, is that she has started a sentencing foundation, a collaborative between herself and other judges here that is resource based. Instead of punitive, folks have a chance to engage with organizations like Power Corps and Youth Bill and things of that nature in lieu of sentencing, so that and if the person follows the mandate and completes whatever program they were mandated to, they have the opportunity to have their cases withdrawn, probation lifted, things of that nature, instead of punitive measures. They're giving them the resources that they actually need. Yeah, so there's a lot of really good movement going on in Philadelphia in terms of us as stakeholders coming together to benefit the whole. I also feel that I also work with adult parole and probation, pretrial, and one of the narratives that need to change within those walls is the draconian way that a lot of parole officers administer their charges. I feel that parole probation officers need to be liaisons to the community, not punitive, reinforcers. People come home and they need direction and guidance. And a lot of POs, they just say, go get a job, go do this. And then if a person has difficulties getting a job because they came home with no ID, and it's a whole process to get their ID, they get violated. So parole and probation needs to have a larger stake in the reentry community as far as giving out resources. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. You all will learn as we work our way through today's session. Jay leaves us with some wonderful sound bites that just hit the right way. And I saw that Shauna in the chat pod made a note of just how much she loves the way that you put talent behind the wall. There's a couple others that I wrote down that I'm going to certainly reference later on in our conversation. But Jay, just thank you for being here today and sharing your experience and life story with us as well. And with that, we're going to transition to Carson White Lemons. Carson is the Director of Criminal Justice at Arnold Ventures. Carson, incredibly grateful for you to take the time to join us today. Please feel free to share with us a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to my fellow panelists and everyone in the chat. I feel like the energy we have in this virtual room, despite not being together in person, is really, gives me hope as we move forward. So as Jennifer said, I'm Carson White Lemons. I'm a director of criminal justice at Arnold Ventures, which is a strategic philanthropy that works to advance evidence-based policies with the goals of maximizing opportunity and minimizing injustice. Arnold Ventures has a portfolio focused on funding research, policy, and advocacy efforts focused on reintegration and reducing the harms of collateral consequences, because we believe that a criminal record should not be a life sentence to poverty. I think what's interesting about these issues is that from what I've seen, as the public has grown more aware of the negative outcomes associated with mass incarceration and supportive of criminal justice reform generally, the long-lasting consequences of a criminal record can still remain invisible, even as they serve as enduring punishments for millions of people in America. Many of the barriers that Lakeithia described, and as we saw in that chart, are automatically applied and permanent and don't leave room for people's behavior to change over time. And what we've seen is that as our criminal justice system has expanded over the past half century, the pool of people impacted by collateral consequences has grown. And so about 1 in 3 American adults possess a criminal record. And the consequences of a criminal record and the barriers we have erected go well beyond the individual. A new study from the University of Michigan that I will drop in the chat if you want to take a look at it, found that about 4 in 10 American children were exposed to the criminal justice system through a parent or caregiver by the time they reach the age of 18. I myself am part of that statistic and have personally experienced the ways having a family member be affected by incarceration and by a criminal record can radiate outward to affect families and communities. And we also know from the evidence that this affects our economy at large. A recent study from the Rand Corporation found that 64% of all unemployed men in this country have a history of criminal justice involvement. And so if we want to strengthen our economy, as Ashley was saying, around the business community's investment in this issue, we really can't ignore the toll of mass incarceration and the importance of addressing collateral consequences. Finally, we know that these barriers are counterproductive for achieving community safety, preventing access to the very resources, employment, housing, and family supports that help reduce recidivism. So that's why we at Arnold Ventures and me personally are so motivated to work to eliminate overly broad barriers that exclude people from access to basic needs, but also fundamental aspects of citizenship like voting rights. And we believe that mitigating the harms of these barriers will help our communities thrive. So with that, I'll pass it back to Jennifer, but I'm really excited to dig into the reform progress we've had on this issue and to learn more from my fellow panelists.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you, Carson. And I'd like to welcome all of our panelists back on camera as we're going to get started with this dynamic conversation. We have a bunch of questions that I am just dying to hear a little bit more about from each of you. But with that said, I just want to point out the depth and breadth of experience that we have here on this panel. Everyone has been impacted in different ways. And everyone has turned that into working towards a collective good. The idea of radiating outwards, we have so much potential to do this, and this conversation is just the start. So I'm going to go ahead and get this conversation starting with Ashley. Ashley, if you don't mind, could you share what are some of the common barriers that you see people who have lived experience face in regards to collateral consequences?
Yeah, of course. So I think we all know the broader buckets of barriers, such as employment access, occupational licensing, access to housing. But there's also so many that are not immediately apparent. And I highly encourage everyone to visit the website, the National Inventory of Collateral Consequences, because you can search by state, area that someone would be affected by. And it's quite astounding to realize how many collateral consequences are out there. So, just to highlight a few that aren't immediately apparent, car insurance is one. Life insurance is another. So related to car insurance, obviously it's an insurance company, so they don't want high risk individuals, particularly if the felony is related to a driving offense, of course. And ironically, when I got out and I was trying to get insurance for my car when I was in the halfway house, and of course there are very specific insurance requirements you have to have, I kept getting denied until I finally got in front of someone to say, first of all, my crime is not related to a vehicle, but so that was a whole process. And then also life insurance is also really interesting that people don't realize. Again, insurance, high risk, perceived as a high risk individual. So I was actually on an insurance company's website yesterday, and they have a little section about how a convicted felon's life insurance options will be more limited. So some insurers only allow felons to qualify for traditional life insurance policies if they meet certain conditions, like they were convicted 10 or more years ago, or even 20 or more years ago for certain crimes. They haven't been on probation or parole for 10 years. Their conviction wasn't related to a violent crime. But again, every insurer has their own eligibility rules for applicants, and some only offer convicted felons a guaranteed issue of life insurance or a policy with an accidental death benefit, no matter how long ago the conviction was. So, I personally experienced all of those, and my crime is, I was sentenced in 2019, so it is still fairly new in that regards, but every day I turn around and I think I can have access to something and it's not there. So, those are just a couple things off the top of my head. But again, I really encourage everyone to visit that website and see some of the collateral consequences, because I was actually searching on it before I got on this webinar, and here in Colorado, I can't apply to be accepted into like the United States Marine, like something. And it was like so random and something that I'm like, I would never have thought of something like that. And then there's also educational institutions too. Some higher education institutions won't allow felons if you have a background. So there's just so many things that people don't realize that you kind of maybe take advantage of before you had your justice system involvement.
Thank you, Ashley, for taking the time to share with us and just some quick demonstrations of how pervasive and eternal these collateral consequences are. Jay, I'd like to invite you to part of this conversation as well. From your perspective, what are some of the most common barriers people with lived experience face in terms of collateral consequences?
Well, thank you, Ashley, for that. Amongst the other things that Ashley mentioned, employment being like one of the number one barriers. I find within the folks I work with and myself when I came home that coming home without any identification is like one of the biggest things, because even if you could get a job or you were allowed to get a job, if you don't have the ID to get the job, you can't get the job. So you're part of catch-22. I find it very incredulous that somebody that's been behind the walls for 10 years will come home and they've not put anything in place for that person, as far as reaching out to a government agency, another sister agency such as Social Security or so that folks can apply for their vital documents and be able to hit the ground running when they come home. I myself, it took me about 9 months to obtain my birth certificate. It took a very long time, and all that time I was homeless in the shelter. But thank God, God blessed me, and he guided me to the Institute of Community Justice, and I'm so grateful to Miss Asada Thomas for working with me. I started there as a volunteer, got on the outreach team, led the outreach team. So a lot of the struggles that folks coming home face, it's unnecessary. It really is. It's adding insult to injury. The purpose of me doing my 5 years was to atone for the crime I did. I think I was the only guilty person in the federal system because to hear everybody tell it they're innocent, but I did what I did and I own it. I own it. I've always owned it. And people ask me I should go get an expungement or a pardon. No, that's part of me. That's my history. Hey, it doesn't, that, I don't need any man's forgiveness. I forgive myself, and I know my Lord is forgiving me. And I'm out here doing the work that I need to do to help others and bring people up behind me. Um, the system, the way it's working as it was designed to, it needs to be broken. People say the system is broken, but we need to break this system of inequity and disenfranchisement. And the only way to do it is us doing it collectively, um, on a large scale. Yeah, that, I'll end there.
Yeah, and Jay, thank you so much for sharing. And that component of your sentence, you did your time, not you specifically, but you in general. And now you're stuck with a lifetime of consequences that continue to impact you in ways that you never expected, ways that people who created them probably anticipated them, but ways that also might have been unintentional as well. Hearing both your story, Ashley's story, how Carson's been impacted and Lakeithia's been impacted by the justice system, through their family members, I'd really like to take a shift and and have a conversation here. And Jay, I'm going to continue with you here for a moment, just because you've shared so much great information. Based off of what you've experienced, can you share some of the practices that have been really helpful for you with either systems or programmings in overcoming some of these collateral consequences, and maybe share some of your big wins too, please?
Um, I don't know. I've been blessed with a very calm spirit, and I see the nature of the beast. And if you understand what it is, you can work around it. I don't beat my head against the wall with all of these things. I just work towards the solution. Because if you get caught up in the minutia of why and who and what, it's becomes undaunting. It becomes really, really burdensome. Little bit at a time is how I go. I have not instituted, but I've been a part of some very major changes here in Philadelphia. I'll explain one. I was a member of the Philadelphia Reentry think tank, and as a member, we had a meeting at the Federal Detention Center here in Philadelphia on Market Street with the warden and some superintendents and things like that. And I told them my story. And my story was that when I was released, they released me from 6th and Market in my prison outfit, in my jumpsuit, my white boat shoes, and no money, no nothing. And if it wasn't for my parole officer who stayed late, because I was declared free at like 10 o'clock, but I didn't get released till like 5 o'clock. And my parole officer, thank God for him, Matt Bennett. I mean, oh my goodness, can't remember his last name, but his name is Matthew. But he stayed late. He gave me a couple dollars, gave me some tokens, directions to the station house shelter, some clothes. It's funny, one of the shoes that I got were Prada, so I walked out of prison in Prada. Well, I went to the homeless shelter in Prada, so go figure. Yeah. So, and then as a result of that meeting, I believe it was within a day or two, they put in a policy that prohibits them from releasing anyone under those conditions. So hopefully I was the last one to be subjugated to that, because if it wasn't for my PO and they left me to my own devices to get to the shelter, that means I'd have had to jump the train turnstile with a whole big looking like an escaped convict ready to be shot by these trigger happy police. So, I just, it's traumatizing, and I did 5 years in prison and I have not been as traumatized as coming home. My whole 5 years was a piece of cake. I can actually say I had no problems, a couple run-ins and stuff like that, but it was a learning experience, and I settled upon it in my own heart that I did what I did. I'm here. We gotta get through this and go home. Count the days to go home. But All of my trauma in this country has come from being a man of color in this country. I mean, you live in a constant state of fear. You live in a constant state of stress. It's not right, man. You can't be your true self in this country the way that the chips are stacked against us. And I'm fighting to make changes, and I really do want it before I die to see some really positive changes where our kids can grow up in peace. It's it's very heartbreaking.
And Jay, I think that you are one of those key puzzle pieces to bringing that piece. I have to say, I've heard portions of your story before. Each time I hear it, my heart sinks even deeper into my chest. I, there's just so much there that I personally will never have experienced. But just to reiterate what he said in regards to being released was more traumatizing than the actual sentence itself. Um, and the idea that this sentence is pervasive into your life within your normal community, right? It never really ends, is what we're talking about here. And so, Jay, on behalf of the Philadelphia community and how Philadelphia is leading the way and making an impact across the country, just want to take a moment to say thank you for sharing, and being so open with sharing your story. Lakeithia, I'm going to shift gears here for a second, and I'd love to hear from your lens as a practitioner, or your lens as a family member. What are some of the practices that have been most helpful that you've seen, in helping to address collateral consequences?
Again, thank you, Jay, because you illustrate like the other side of what, like where I sit from a program manager. It's really easy. We all have our data performance we have to meet for all of our funders, for government contracts, and just the fact that you needed time. And so I think the first thing as a program practitioner is looking at where your program is working and where it isn't. At Strive, we're very much a employment agency. We've been doing it for 30 years, but we had to dig into our data and say, and we realized that people who were recently coming home weren't doing as well. They weren't staying in the program. And once we dug into, there were a number of different factors. We created a new program called the Start Program, which is specifically for people who are coming home within 6 months of incarceration. And that program, we budget money for things like birth certificates and for IDs and for all of the records. We helping people get stable, making sure they have food. And just because so many people, because of housing barriers, for example, so many people might end up living on someone's couch. That puts them at the mercy of an argument or something completely disrupting their lives. And so, first, I'd say really looking at where you're effective and where you're not for practitioners, and leaning into and being curious about where you're not, and thinking about if you want to really serve people, you have to be meeting people where they are. And that means, as Jay really eloquently stated, they need time and support getting the basics of their life on track before they can think about training and an employment program. And so much of my career had been like, okay, you have to come in, we have to go, what are we doing? We're getting you trained, we're getting, and moving. And it's, you can't really do that if you really want to make an impact and you really want to help people get their lives back on track. You have to be thinking about that. So we created a fresh start program that does just that, helps partner with people, making sure we raise money so that we can meet people where they are. And if they need toiletries or whatever it is that they need to get to stability, that we're there to be a partner. I think the second thing is realizing that no program, no matter how well intentioned, can do everything, can be all things to all people. So that we have to make sure of really being good at what we're good at and partnering for everything else. But that means we have to have legal partners who can be helping people with all sorts of issues, clearing up their backgrounds, clearing up their records, because understanding things that are on their rap sheet that shouldn't be is a whole other thing. We can't address that by ourselves. We don't provide housing. We have to make sure we have really great housing partners who can see people and help them get into whether they have no matter what IDs and situations they have. So really making sure that we have a robust system of partners and understanding the barriers that people face, and giving people time and really understanding and meeting people where they are. I would say those have been our best practices, and just being really honest about, even if you're working hard, if it's not reaching the people that you intend to reach, then you have to try new strategies. And I think those things have really served us well.
Thank you, Lakeithia. Those are some really great tips too. I also just wanted to pause for a moment and say thank you to Carlos for sharing his story in the chat pod. Jay, if you haven't been following along, you're quickly developing a fan club. If you need a boost, print out this chat script here and just reference it any day. People are just really grateful for you for sharing your story. Carson, I want to take a moment and put the spotlight on you. So, we all know that Arnold works a lot on policy, driving policy, evaluating policy, trying to figure out what's the best way forward. Can you share with us what are some key policy efforts that are underway that look to address collateral consequences?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think it's so important how the efforts that people like Lakeithia and Jay are involved in terms of real practice and service to people who are coming home are always in conversation with these broader policy efforts that really are looking to change state law. And the more connectivity there is there, the more effective policy change is going to be. And we have a ways to go on this issue. I think it's exciting that we have seen policy reform momentum move forward, even during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly reform as a way to address our economic crisis really did continue. And so in 2021 alone, 40 states enacted over 150 laws that in some way restored rights and opportunities to people with a conviction history. The Collateral Consequences Resource Center tracks those reforms year by year and by state. And so I'll drop that in the chat. And they are hard at work on 2022's report, which will be coming out soon. And, generally, there's a lot of different types of reform in this area, but I'm going to focus on two main types where we've seen a lot of changes. The first type is what I would term, barrier removal efforts. These are really laws that are trying to target and reduce the number of barriers and restrictions in place or how they operate. And importantly, organizations are figuring out ways not just to eliminate one barrier at a time, because that would take us, over 40,000 years. We don't have time for that. But thinking about how to, in a more broad-based way, target entire categories of restrictions or entire industries. So in occupational licensing, for example, which Ashley mentioned before, 1 in 5 jobs now require some form of occupational license, and numerous states have now passed laws that impact multiple licensing boards at once to make the licensing process less exclusionary for people with records and to ensure more consistency and transparency. The second broad category of reform that I see is really shielding people's criminal records from view to ensure that the barriers in place no longer apply. And so within that category, record clearance or record sealing has seen a huge wave of growth. Again, as Ashley mentioned, clean slate laws with the advances in technology have been able to shift the burden of applying for record clearance from an individual, which can be expensive and time-consuming, to the government to say certain categories of records after a defined period of time are no longer relevant. And so those should be sealed and not accessible for people like employers. And so just this year, Colorado, Oklahoma, and California all passed automatic record clearance legislation, which are collectively projected to clear millions of people's records once they're fully implemented. So there's a lot more we could talk about. As I said, there's been a lot of progress on various issues in this area, but I would say those are the broad strokes and the main themes of reform. And the last thing I'll just say is that what we've seen across these efforts is bipartisan support in understanding that second chances are important, and the connectivity between this issue not just affecting criminal justice, but the health of our economy. And so I think that's what's given this continued relevance, even amidst the pandemic.
Thank you, Carson. While it's really wonderful to hear about the progress that's being made, I just want to take a moment. Something that you said really struck me. If we were to address all the collateral consequences, it would take us 40,000 years. Think about how old our country is. Our Constitution isn't even 250 years old. Think about the rate at which we had to put collateral consequences in place to get to this point in time. And so I'll reference the intentionality of that a little bit later, but also how do we move forward with unintended consequences. But I just really, we've been talking about this for the last couple weeks as we prepare for this. And that's something that I've never taken the moment to stop and think about is the rate at which we created these collateral consequences. 44, like over 44,000, close to 40,000 in 250 years. And it would take us 40,000 years to undo that. That's pretty significant. With that, we're going to go ahead and shift to that topic of unintentional consequences. And I say this with knowing that many of these consequences were built in intentionally, and I don't want to take away from that and be respectful of not how they were created, to be clear, but that people continue to be impacted by them and held back by them. But I also, as a practitioner, as an advocate, as someone who really cares about driving this community forward, how do we avoid what we don't mean to do? How do we approach and shape policies so that we don't create consequences moving forward? Ashley, I'd really love to hear your views on this and being recently released and now working your way through it. What are some ideas or solutions you think that you could bring to the table? And I should have paused right before I asked you that and just remind everyone, the chat pod is open. We also have the Q&A pod. If you don't want to ask a question publicly, we're happy to protect any I never say this right, anonymity. I hope I got it right. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question publicly, but we will be addressing everyone's questions at the end of this session. But Ashley, just to reiterate, how do we avoid these unintended consequences as we, in the best, like with the best of intentions, continue to move forward?
Yeah.
How do we not create traps?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is basing policy on evidence, not just assumptions based on historical narratives that are sometimes misinformed. So then we can see what's worked to actually reduce recidivism, make communities safer, allow for effective reentry programs. So adopting policies that reflect that actual evidence and not these knee-jerk, like tough on crime responses that typically happen. And then also, I like to say nothing for us without us, right? So having people that have that lived experience involved in the planning process. You know, there's a lot of really well-intentioned people out there who think they're implementing things that are going to be really helpful, and then the unintended consequence comes up. So that's kind of where we fail by not having people impacted be a part of that decision making process. And it also gives any proposed changes credibility when you have those people who've been impacted by the system there and having the conversations about systemic change and involving them in policy. It can prevent those missteps and unintended consequences from happening, and also ensure that we're communicating on the issues in a way that's helpful and not harmful to people who have been impacted.
Thank you, Ashley. I was just about to respond in the chat pod, but I'll go ahead and say it out loud. Lauren says +1 for Ashley for saying nothing for us without us. I would make the argument +1 million, plus infinity. That should be the expectation from the beginning.
I mean, no one wants to have a decision made on their behalf, right? Without, especially if it's going to impact someone you negatively. No one, everyone would like to have a say in something that's going to impact their life, I think.
Yeah. And so, Carson, there's a bunch of questions for you in the chat pod that we'll get to in just a moment. But how can we approach and shape policies from your perspective, and being someone who lives in this world professionally? How do we avoid these unintended consequences?
Well, I think Ashley's point is crucial to that, making sure that as policy reforms are being built in a particular state, that people with lived experience are not only at the table but are driving those efforts. I think evidence, as she mentioned, is important, and there are ways to build in tracking and measurement to policies that are passing so that we can help create a feedback loop and say, how is this actually working? For occupational licensing, for example, if there's a reform passed, how many people with criminal records are still being denied licenses? And is there a problem that still needs to be addressed? And so the more I think we get out of the mindset of once the bill is passed, the work is done, the more successful we will be. And I think that's really just when the work begins, because there's always more to do, more refinement, and we can always go further in terms of expanding opportunities.
Thank you, Carson. And Jay, I'm gonna hand it to you in just a minute to wrap up this question about how do we avoid unintended consequences. But something you said earlier really struck me in allowing individuals to design and implement their own futures. And something that you've said to me in a past conversation is leading with love, treating everyone like they're your own family. Um, would love to have you wrap up this specific conversation before we head to our next topic on your thoughts in regards to avoiding these unintentional consequences and making sure we're creating sound policies moving forward that don't leave negative impacts.
Okay. One of the major things that we implement in my program is leading with love. Our youth know when somebody's genuine with them, when a program is being genuine, and they know when they people have their best interests at heart. Just imagine a world where we all took care of each other. Everybody took care of everybody else. Nobody would need to be taken care of because we're all looking after each other. And that's the type of community that we build at Power Core. Um, it's proven. Our participants, I accompany them, I advocate for them in court, and you would think that we gave them a script to read. Like 99% of them all say the same thing. They've never done nothing like this before. It's great. I love it. It's opened up my mind. It's redirected me. We have to change the narrative on how we're doing things. And to answer the question on ending or combating collateral consequences, I'm an end game kind of guy. You don't kill a tree by cutting off some of the branches. That's what we're out here doing. We pruning branches and shit. Excuse me, I'm sorry. We're pruning branches. Um, the reason mass incarceration is such in effect is because it's about the money. And in order to, because all we're doing is we're putting a band-aid on things. We're picking up the scraps after they have already incarcerated somebody, and now we're out here trying to bring them home and get them acclimated and all of this stuff. And as long as we continue doing the work the way we're doing, we're never gonna get nowhere. We have to take away the power, and the power is the 13th Amendment. If we can repeal the 13th Amendment, that'll take away their reason for locking us up. The reason for them locking us up is because they make much money off of us, all these private prisons. And the reason that they make that money because the 13th Amendment states that nobody should be indebted to involuntary servitude unless convicted of a crime. And our founders of this country knew that no form of oppression such as slavery can go on forever. Eventually, it'll collapse. And they wrote that 13th Amendment in there as a safety net to perpetuate slavery. If you look at Angola State Prison, Angola State Plantation, it was a plantation. They freed the slaves. Them same slaves were freed into the streets. And then they started coming up with all these laws, vagrancy laws, this, that, the third, and all of these different laws, and put them same people back on that plantation. Now it's called Angola State Penitentiary. So they prepared themselves for the end of slavery as we know it, and and that's where a lot of our focus need to be. Repealing the 13th Amendment, that'll take away their motivation for locking us up because they won't be able to make money. If they do lock us up, we can sit in prison and not do nothing. We can sit there all day, but they make you work. They make you work to build furniture, clothing, so many different things that they pay you 19 cents an hour while they're making $1,000 an hour off of us. So we need to take away their incentive for locking us up. And the only way to do that is get rid of the 13th Amendment. Until we do that, this is going to be a revolving door of bull.
Jay, thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Lots of things to take away. In shifting gears one last time before we get to the Q&A from the panel, Lakeithia, I'd like to put a little bit of focus on you here. So I should have mentioned earlier, you're a new member of the coordination committee here at the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. You share a little bit with us about what is the NRWC's plans moving forward, and what are some projects that we might be working on to address these collateral consequences?
Thank you so much. I tell Jason all the time that I drank the Kool-Aid. The moment I'm a person who believes wholeheartedly in collaboration, that we go further together by leveraging all of our strengths. And after I attended that conference, I said, "Sign me up. I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm ready to do whatever I can to help advance the mission." And so, as you mentioned, as Carson mentioned, there's a lot of different things happening all over our country. But right now, most people are not aware of it. And so when you're not aware of something, it's much harder to build momentum. So NRWC has determined that there's a role we can play collectively to first help bring a spotlight on initiatives across the country that have successfully eliminated collateral consequence. So we're not talking just putting a band-aid on them in the ways that people find to get around them, but really truly eliminating. And so the way to do that is we developed a solution center. We're going to be spotlighting some of those solutions that Carson mentioned and researching others, making sure that it's at all of our fingertips so that we each can be advocating in our own communities and been thinking about how we can collaborate and bringing more and more people to the table. So, and we also have a collateral consequences work group. I'm hoping that people who sign on as members will join so that we can actually start doing the work of finding out about these collateral consequences, educating ourselves about them, and then helping people really come up with action plans to help eliminate them. But the first step is really making sure that we're aware of them and aware of what can be done across our country. So I really hope that more people sign up and join us. But I'm excited about the possibility of just like becoming a catalyst to the change that the ripples that we're seeing across the country, and that's what we're intending to do.
Thank you, Lakeithia, for sharing that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and shift to some of the comments and questions that have been put into the chat pod. Carson, just to get us started, there's one that's really easy that I think you could just answer in the chat pod for us. There's a question about, is there a state that's leading the way that we could learn from, meaning in supporting and creating opportunities, or maybe if there's a couple that would be really helpful. Also, Michael made a statement in regards to making sure that our language is used correctly, and that and also recognizing that a lot of these consequences are intentional. I don't think anyone here is suggesting otherwise, but also want to take responsibility as with the influence that we have, making sure we do our due diligence, that we don't create more, even if we have the best of intentions. Here's one of the first questions that we received in regards to data. Does anyone have any data? And I'll just open this up for the group, and how long it generally takes for folks to gain sustainability, or how long people spend in programs or trainings before they're in jobs that they can sustain themselves without wraparound or supportive services. So really quickly, from my point of view, it would be 18 months minimum for us here at Goodwill, but I'd love to hear from Lakeithia, Jay, Ashley, if you can maybe just off the top of your head, give us a quick number. Carson, if you have any great studies in that brain of yours, share as well. But let's start with Lakeithia, head to Jay, and then Ashley. How long in general do you see individuals engaged in programming at your organizations?
Well, we actively follow up with people for 2 years, and what I've been increasingly trying to work with funders and everyone to understand is that the first job is often just the first job. My first job did not get me to a family sustaining wage, and that's often the case. So we find that we needed to lengthen the on ramp before people can take off. So a longer program to get stable, plus the 2 years of up. So your 18 months sounds right, and within that, we're really trying to help people once they get stable get their job, get training, get a job, and then get a better job. But yeah, I think the 18 months sounds right to me.
Hey, what would that number be in your experience?
Uh, we have 3 stages to my program. It's the trust program. Each stage runs about 4 months, 4 months in trust, and then 4 months in the foundation. And then you can do about up to 18 months in a fellowship position. And then we do aftercare wraparound services. We stay for up to a year, but actually it's more than that. We have alumni that still come back to us. Um, what I like to tell our folks is that when you first come to us, I use the 90-10 rule. In the beginning, I'll do 90% of the lifting, and we're going to work towards you getting to with those roll that paradigm shift to where you're doing 10, and I'm doing 10, you're doing 90, until you get to the point where you're at 99% self-sufficiency. But I'll always be there as that 1% if you ever come into hard times again, because life be life, and people make mistakes or things happen, and they might need your help again. So, and technically in my book, there is no limit on the time. There's no time limit on how long I would help a person. But programmatically, they're in our program up to 18 months.
You
Can't hear
saying
you.
Ashley? What about you? You're on mute, Jennifer, but Ashley.
Yeah, I meant Ashley. Thank you, Lakeithia, for being a master at reading my lips and my mind. Ashley, Carson, any additional information there beyond what Jay and Lakeithia shared?
No, I would say I'm in Colorado as well, which, like Carson mentioned, is really kind of one of the states leading the way. I'm very proud to say that I'm from Colorado because of that, honestly. And I think from my personal experience, so I was released during COVID. So access to some of the programs was like super limited, if I could even get into any programs at all. But now that I'm seeing more and more things reopen, I would say 1 to 2 years is about, once someone comes in the program and they get their feet back under them, and then the subsequent follow up, it's about 18 months to 2 years in overall.
Thank you. Carson, this next question is you. Are you familiar with anyone who's worked on the issue of eliminating some specific wording, specifically moral turpitude from state statutes? And the example that was referenced is occupational licensing, but I'm sure there's many more examples that we could call on for that.
Yes, great question. And this is one of the kind of reform possibilities where you can say statewide, using moral turpitude as a restriction will no longer be allowed, and instead this criteria can be used. So that's something where, across multiple licensing boards, you can change that rule in one law. 17 states have fully implemented some reform specifically targeting moral turpitude itself. So I'll drop in the chat, there are some state by state maps around licensing reform and where it is. And that way you can also get a sense of, from states that have passed, what that language looks like. There's also model legislation on occupational licensing reform, both from the Institute for Justice and the National Employment Law Project, and both of those address the moral turpitude issue. So I'll go ahead and just, I know I've been popping a lot in the chat, but I'll just keep dropping things in there.
Yeah, no, and Carson, thank you for all the knowledge that you have accumulated. It is so impressive. I mean, everyone is collaborating here. Everyone is sharing their own bits, but just thank you for this level of expertise that you bring to the conversation to be able to pull these links and studies and have them available readily for everyone. It makes a big difference. So the next question is one that I know I could answer, and I'm going to kind of reframe it in a little way. So the question was, has any of these barriers listed uh, try to be like adjusted before someone leaves the system? So I know that the answer is yes. I know that I worked on reentry collaboratives that have tried to do this. Maybe if we could just reframe the question and go around the horn and say, like, what is one way that you, as a final question, are currently working, have worked, or would like to work in terms of making these changes prior to release for individuals, so that, as Jay referenced earlier, um, they don't experience as much trauma as they're released, and that they continue to have that opportunity to radiate outwards and to bring their talent to their communities. So we'll start with Lakeithia, Jay, Ashley, and then Carson, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up for today.
Sure. So for Strive, our work has depended upon whether we had contracts that were working internally into incarceration, or but right now, what we in the past what we did is just basic assessments, making sure people had plans to where can you stay, making sure people had someone who could pick them up, um, uh, money just in transportation to get to us, to get to family, making sure once they come to us that we can give them some $50 immediately so they can have something to be able to do to just eat, or making sure they get a coat. It's so it's really being very granular, but starting the planning sooner, honestly. And That's some of the things that, like, the barriers that Jay really talked about. And then it's like making sure when we're doing a training that we're really looking at people's credentials and making sure that they'll be able to get the job if they're and that we're not wasting anybody's time. So that's how we address the barrier of the licensing right now, but then really recommending that we start assessments as soon as possible and start helping people get tangible and having an action plan so that people can actually get to stability.
Thank you, Lakeithia. Jay, uh,
Yeah.
go ahead, share.
One of the things that I'm doing to help our folks come home a little more prepared is that we work with folks on State Road, trying to get an office in State Road to go up there and meet with folks like maybe 6 months before they're released, so we can start paperwork for them, work with the case managers behind the walls. I'm also trying to broker with SCI Chester. So SCI Chester is like a step down facility, and for people who are being released here in Philadelphia County, where they get there, I believe it's 16 months before their release date. I'm trying to get up in there so that we can start working with them on that 16th month, whether they need their birth certificate, their social security card, their diploma, any replacement documents, any just get them the ball rolling so that when they walk through them damn doors, they can walk into an employment agency. They can walk into anywhere and get a job because they all the T's and I's are taken care of for them. You know, they come home to their full status, because that's one of the problems. We become unstatus people. They call us returning citizens, but shit, I never left this country. I've been here the whole time. I even got a voted absentee ballot when I was in FCI Gilmer. You know, I'm a good enough citizen for you to count me on your rolls in whichever municipality you put me in, to bolster their numbers and got grant monies from the federal government. So what changed when I came out? Now why am I not a person anymore? You know, like I say, coming home is more traumatic than being in prison, and that's a fact. Um, that's why we have to lead with love. And to really make a change, we all have to remember the humanity of this situation. A lot of organizations, they out for grant money and they think they're doing good, but they're not leading with love and they're not treating the human side of this. Everybody's different. We just gotta start treating people like we want to be treated. Like if that was your mom or your pop in jail and coming home to the bullshit, you know. Um, we got to rethink the way we're looking at this. We got to think like human damn beings, man. People, it's crazy. It just boggles my mind on how insensitive we are to each other, and that's all the way they designed it to pit us against each other. And it's working very well. We just have to one day just say enough is a damn enough. And we have the voices, we have the power, you know, we have the voting power, and it just boggles my mind as why we still mob down in all of this when each and everybody on this panel everybody knows that this is wrong. It's wrong. and we sitting here spinning our wheels instead of, yo, I don't, you getting me, have me put my radical hat on.
Well, Jay,
So
I think the radical hat is sometimes what gets work done, right? It's what helps engage people and keep people going. I do just want to give Ashley and Carson a opportunity to answer this. So, Ashley and Carson, maybe just 30-second response. What are you currently working on before we wrap up our session today?
Yeah, I think from RBIJ's perspective, it's just getting businesses more involved. You know, businesses are community leaders and they have a responsibility to make their communities better and safer places to live and work. So whether it's investing in or creating partnerships with CBOs providing services to reentering citizens, or even getting more involved in occupational licensing, driver's license, you know, people need documents like that to get jobs. And you know, businesses can't fill their open roles if people re-entering society don't have a license or their birth certificate. So very quick, 30
Yeah,
seconds.
thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. Carson?
Yeah, I think it's just about creating opportunity for people, both inside and outside prison walls, and that's going to require both removing some of these overly broad barriers, but also increasing access to supports and other services to ensure success, and that both of those pieces are important and need to be linked together. So I just really appreciate the time that we've gotten to spend here today and what I've learned from everyone, both in the chat and on this screen. So thank you.
I think I speak for us all when I say this is a topic that you cannot address properly in just 75 minutes, even though we did our best, certainly. I do want to just bring your attention really quickly to a save the date. Our next Thought Leadership series will be coming up March 3rd, 2023, where we'll be discussing employer engagement. We're also going to have a quick survey come up, I believe, or poll, if you could provide us some feedback. And if we could just go ahead and go to the last slide. I know that that's what everyone's really waiting for, is contact information. As we express our deep gratitude, thanks, and appreciation to all of our panelists today for not just joining us today and prepping on for today's call, but for how they lead in their communities each and every single day, how they choose to dedicate their careers to this by giving back to their communities. And so here you can find everyone's email addresses if you'd like to reach out. There are just a couple questions that we did not get to. If I could just have the panelists stay on the call, I'm going to repost them in the chat pod, and potentially you could just answer them through the chat. But with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. I think it's been an inspirational, educational session, and we appreciate your support here. So don't forget to visit the website at NRWC.org for more information. We will do our best to get you out this recording, the slides, and I did see a request for the chat pod too. I'm a big networking person, so I would always appreciate that as well. And we just appreciate your support as an audience and as attendees. This would not be possible if you didn't show up and ask such great and engaging questions each time. So from us to you, thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, healthy, and a new year full of joy, because I think that we all deserve that. So thank you, everyone. Panelists, I'm going to enter those questions into the chat pod if you don't mind just responding to them if you have any feedback.